I sit in the dark, shivering in a foreign land, feeling the memory of who I am slipping away into the shadows of exile. The temptation to just give up, to bow to the idols of this world, presses heavy on my chest. But what if everything we were taught about heaven in the dust of our despair is only a fraction of the truth? In our oldest sacred scrolls, there is a man whose name still anchors us. Enoch. He was physically led by the Creator through 7 distinct domains above this broken earth. 7 layers of reality our priests have forgotten. You and I are going to unpack this story together, my fellow exile. Because we are not stopping at the first sky, we are going all the way. What waits for us in the 7th heaven is so staggering, it will rebuild your fractured faith. Do not turn away from me yet. Let us start at the beginning, understanding who this man truly was. We grew up reciting the ancient genealogies, repeating the names to fight off the loneliness of our captivity. Genesis chapter 5 gives us his story like a quiet whisper. Every other man in that lineage followed the same weary curse we face today. They lived, they suffered, they had children, and they died, over and over until the pattern suddenly shatters. The scroll tells us Enoch walked faithfully with the Almighty. Then he was no more, because God took him away. No death, no burial, no grave to mourn over. The Maker of the heavens reached into our dust and pulled him out. The letter to the Hebrews confirms it. He simply vanished into the holy presence. By faith, he was taken from this life without tasting the bitter ashes of death. In all our long, tragic history, only 2 men were ever pulled from this earth alive, Enoch and the wild prophet Elijah. That alone tells me this was a man so deeply aligned with heaven that death itself had no power over him. But in my deepest nights of isolation, I always wondered, what did Enoch see on the way up? The Book of Enoch answers this mystery. And before the religious elite tried to silence it. Remember, this text was buried in the desert caves, preserved on ancient scrolls. The early believers revered it. Even Jude, the very brother of the Messiah, quoted it directly in his own letters. He treated the words of Enoch as a true, authoritative prophecy for exiles like us. If the brother of our Lord trusted this vision, perhaps we should hold on to it too. This ancient text does not contradict our scriptures. It breathes life into the empty spaces. It answers the agonizing questions that haunt me when I am alone in the dark. Where do the dead actually go? What are the angels doing while we suffer? What does the raw presence of God feel like? Stick with me. This is where it gets interesting, because Enoch saw it all with his own eyes. And listen to me carefully. If you are hearing my voice right now, it is not by chance. God does not waste your pain. Whatever fear you are carrying, whatever temptation is crushing your identity, bring it with you. This path through the 7 heavens has the power to meet us exactly where we are. Right before Enoch stepped across the threshold into the 1st heaven, God revealed a terrifying truth to him about the souls of the dead. What Enoch saw completely shatters the comfortable, simple stories we tell ourselves to feel better. The 1st heaven is about to open, and our understanding of the afterlife will never be the same. If this truth is already stirring your weary soul, make sure you stay with me, so you do not miss a single step of this revelation. Imagine standing at the edge of your entire life. The cruel earth beneath your feet begins to dissolve. The silent sky above peels back like a heavy linen curtain. Suddenly, you are standing in a place that has always been there, perfectly ordered, totally invisible to our tear-filled eyes. Enoch arrived here first. Before we take another breath, you need to understand something crucial. This 1st heaven is not the glorious paradise I dream of when the pain of this world becomes too much. It is not the throne room. It is a vast, terrifyingly massive architectural wonder. The ancient scroll describes it as a cosmic structure sitting directly upon the firmament, exactly where Genesis says the waters were separated from the waters. I used to read that verse and feel nothing. But Enoch actually stood inside it. He saw the great celestial ocean, a roaring reservoir suspended above the sky. It is a terrifying expanse of cosmic water that controls the rain, the violent weather, and the very air we breathe. It made him realize how small our human struggles truly are in the shadow of creation. This is not just some old myth we tell to comfort ourselves. Psalm 148 commands the waters above the skies to praise the Lord. It is a physical, terrifying reality, but it was not the cosmic ocean that made Enoch freeze in terror. It was the angels. I have always felt so abandoned, so alone, but Enoch saw that this first heaven is swarming with immortal beings. They are not the golden warriors of our traditions. They are the silent, frightening angels of the natural world. The angels of bitter snow, violent hail, rolling mist, and crashing thunder. Each one stands locked at their post, executing their eternal commands with a flawless, terrifying obedience that you and I, in all our weak and broken humanity, could never hope to maintain for a single day. I stand in the dust, staring up at the ancient sky, and a chilling thought grips my soul. Think about every violent storm that has battered us, every dawn that breaks your spirit, every season dragging on. We tell ourselves it is just wind and empty air. But Enoch's ancient words terrify me. There are unseen watchers holding the reins of the clouds. When the Almighty interrogated Job about the storehouses of snow and violent hail, he was not spinning poetry. I realize now, trembling in my isolation, that Enoch walked through those literal, towering gates. What frightens me about this first heaven is the absolute, crushing order of God. On the very edge of the kingdom, there is no chaos, no accidents, just terrifyingly powerful beings existing only to obey, perfectly holding up a world where I feel entirely lost. Let this sink in as you and I sit here in the ruins of our certainty. If the Creator is so deliberate about the rain beating against my face, if He posts celestial guards over the turning of seasons, how can I still believe He abandoned me? My heart aches with loneliness. Fearing the God who architects the atmosphere is indifferent to my unraveling identity. But this first heaven screams the truth my enemy wants me to forget. God is not distracted. He is not scrambling to fix my broken life. He is ruling every unseen terror with unshakable sovereignty. Yet a cold dread washes over me. If that stunning, rigid obedience is just the entryway, just the welcoming threshold of the cosmic order, then what awaits us in the second heaven shatters my nerves. Because what Enoch saw next was not order, it was not light. The second heaven is a brutal, suffocating prison. It is a place of darkness so heavy, so saturated with relentless grief, that when Enoch finally saw who was chained within it, he collapsed into the dirt and wept. I feel that same crushing sorrow threatening to consume me every day. There are realms in the spirit never meant for mortal eyes, spaces so thick with the unbearable weight of divine judgment that even holy angels bow their heads in dread. But Enoch was not an angel. He was fragile, terrified flesh and bone, just like I am. Stepping into that nightmare shook him violently, stripping away his comfort. I must hold on to this truth, because this is not dead history. The ancient horrors locked in that second realm are directly fueling the spiritual warfare, tearing my life apart right now. The instant he crossed into that second heaven, the very air died. There was no radiant light, no faithful angels turning the wheels of creation. Enoch breathed in pure, suffocating darkness, but it was not just an absence of light. I feel it creeping into my own soul sometimes, the active presence of something fundamentally ruined. Something that was once unimaginably glorious, but threw it all away in a catastrophic moment of rebellion. Out there in the blackness, Enoch saw the fallen ones, bound, trapped, waiting in agony. He saw their faces twisted with a grief beyond human words, their hollow eyes realizing the horrifying cost of their treason. This is exactly what Peter and Jude warned us about when they wrote that God did not spare the angels who rebelled, but hurled them into the abyss, locking them in chains of utter darkness. They are still there, fully conscious, rotting in the dark holding cell of the second heaven. As I desperately try to hold onto my faltering faith, I am paralyzed by what this means. These prisoners were not weak. They were not fragile, easily tempted humans like me. They were the most powerful, beautiful entities in the universe. They bathed in the raw presence of the Almighty. They knew the depths of heaven's glory, yet, despite having everything, they still fell. They willingly chose to shatter their identities, to rebel against the sovereign order. Their punishment was instant and irreversible. The terror of that choice haunts my quietest, loneliest hours. Even Lucifer, wandering among the fiery stones, was the absolute pinnacle of wisdom and flawless beauty before his pride poisoned him. He had every spiritual advantage, yet he chose his selfish desires over obedience, turning the second heaven into an eternal monument of ruin. But what shattered Enoch entirely, and what breaks my own weary heart as I stand on the edge of giving up, was the raw, unbearable despair in their faces. This righteous man, who had clung to God through 3 centuries of isolation, collapsed in tears for beings who violently destroyed their destiny. Then, the fallen ones begged Enoch for something so tragic it makes me gasp for air. They begged him to intercede for them, to pray on their behalf. They knew, with a chilling certainty, that their own voices were permanently muted. Their rebellion had severed their lifeline to the Creator. They lost the very thing I take for granted, the ability to be heard, access, the breathtaking power to cry out into the vastness and know the Creator is listening. They threw that open door of grace into the fire, willingly abandoning their holy identities. Now, locked in the freezing void, with an unstoppable judgment roaring toward them, these ancient powers had to beg a fragile mortal to pray for them. Their own voices were dead to heaven. I realize now I cannot waste this. I cannot treat my connection to God like a cheap tool I drop when temptation pulls me into the dark. If beings of that magnitude could lose everything, I must fiercely guard the fragile faith I have left. I must hold fast to the cross. Because as we finally push past the prison of the fallen, the third heaven is waiting to expose a terrifying mystery I have feared my entire life. Where do the dead actually go? I used to think paradise and punishment were separated by vast, infinite galaxies. But as I walked beside Enoch into the third heaven, that comforting illusion shattered. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I felt completely alone. We were looking at 2 eternal realities existing side by side. They were separated only by what a person chose to do with God's grace while they still had breath. I need you to brace yourself for what I witnessed here. It answers that agonizing question we all ask at a fresh graveside: where did they go? The moment Enoch and I stepped into this strange place, my own identity felt fragile, ready to completely dissolve. The first thing that hit me was a radiant presence so utterly saturated with life and divine beauty that it defied all human language. I stood there staring at a garden that made the earth I once loved look like a pale, fading memory. Honestly, looking at it made me feel like an absolute stranger to myself. The trees possessed a terrifying splendor, and the flowers literally breathed out light. I knelt beside rivers of thick honey, rich oil, and sweet wine that flowed with an impossible abundance. Above us hung a fragrance so heavy with the nearness of God that it crushed my old earthly desires into dust. This was true paradise. It is the exact place the criminal on the cross saw when he begged Jesus to remember him. I felt a pang of deep loneliness, wondering if I would be remembered too. Jesus told that dying man that he would join him in paradise that very same day. Not eventually, not after a long, cold sleep. The very second that thief stopped breathing, his soul entered this same magnificent garden. Paul the Apostle was once caught up to this exact dimension. Hearing secrets so holy, he was forbidden to ever speak them, but my sense of wonder quickly turned to a suffocating fear. This place was not just a revelation, it was a brutal warning. As Enoch and I turned away from the light, a bitter wind cut through my soul. On the other side of the divide lay a place of absolute darkness, cold, and unrelenting grief. It was a prison for those who rejected grace and lived entirely for their own selfish desires. The sheer gravity of their hopelessness pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Standing on the edge, I felt a terrifying pull, whispering that I belonged in that misery. This is the exact terror Jesus described when he spoke of the rich man and the beggar Lazarus. The moment they died, their eternal addresses were locked in. I stared out across the great, gaping chasm that separated the garden from the torment, and a profound emptiness washed over me. The divide is completely permanent, no negotiations, no second chances. The horror of it chilled my blood. Your fate is sealed the very second you leave your body, not at some distant judgment day. But listen to me. I am not telling you this just to paralyze you with fear. I am telling you this because standing here, feeling the desperate agony of the lost, I know how desperately you need His love. The door of grace is still open right now. You still possess the incredible freedom to choose your side. The third heaven acts like a massive, terrifying mirror reflecting the daily choices of the living. God is practically saying, I have exposed both realities to you, so now you must choose. As I stood trembling between the light and the dark, terrified of losing my own soul, Enoch and I were suddenly pulled higher. We surged past the garden, leaving the bitter cold of the abyss far below. We were entering the fourth heaven. The sheer force of the cosmic light, there threatened to rip away everything I thought I knew about myself. What I saw next made every earthly moment of worship feel incredibly small and empty. There are points in this terrifying vision where human language totally breaks down, where your mind simply shatters against the divine. We had survived the dark and the light. Stepping into the fourth heaven, the atmosphere instantly crushed my fragile sense of self. Everything we had seen before felt like a mere shadow, fading into the background. I need to take you there with me, because standing in that blazing domain completely destroyed my old understanding of reality. This is pure celestial glory. I watched the sun and the moon tearing across the sky, and stars burning their ordained paths with a terrifying mathematical precision. It made me feel so incredibly small, like a single grain of sand lost in an endless storm. But here is the detail that absolutely froze my blood as I watched it unfold. The sun and the moon were not just dead rocks drifting aimlessly through a dark void. They were escorted. Massive beings moved beside them in perfect obedience. I saw towering celestial angels, specifically assigned to guard the sun, marching alongside it. They were singing and pouring out a sound of worship so fiercely unbroken that it almost tore my soul apart. That song has never stopped for a single heartbeat since God first spoke light into the dark. Hearing it made my earthly struggles feel so meaningless and isolated. Well, think about what that actually means. While you were lying awake last night, feeling entirely alone and abandoned, the fourth heaven was violently shaking with thunderous praise. The sky above truly proclaims His handiwork, just like the ancient Psalms say. But Enoch and I did not just read those words. I stood entirely swallowed by them. The vibrations rattled my bones. It forces you to realize something absolutely vital. If that massive celestial chorus has been roaring since before the dawn of time, then God's glory does not rely on my personal failures or my deep spiritual exhaustion. Whether you are walking through fire or standing on the peaks of victory, the sky is still singing. Yet, just as I felt tempted to lose myself entirely in that endless music, Enoch and I were dragged upward again into the fifth heaven. I was completely unprepared for the emotional devastation waiting there. The glorious music died. We were suddenly drowning in a heavy, suffocating, grief-stricken silence. The absolute quiet was so heavy it felt like physical pressure crushing my lungs. We had entered the prison of the fallen watchers. These were once angels of the highest order, beings of immense power who protected us. As I stood in the fifth heaven, the silence was absolute terror. These beings were once our guardians, the living bridges tethering our frail world to the divine, but so many broke. They abandoned their post, descending into the dirt of our world to twist the natural order, bleeding their spiritual sickness into humanity until the great waters had to wash it all away. I looked at the ones who stayed faithful. They did not speak, they only mourned. Their fallen brothers were now locked in the lightless prison of the second heaven. The sheer weight of that broken brotherhood pressed against my chest until I could barely breathe. The suffocating grief of this place threatened to crush me, erasing the frail human identity I held onto. I stood among them, profoundly lonely, feeling the terrifying gravity of our shared ruin. Listen, you and I must grasp something crucial about that devastating silence. Their sorrow was not passive surrender. It was the crushing agony of beings who understood the catastrophic price of abandoning your post. I felt a dark temptation pulling at my own soul. The desperate urge to walk away from God when the calling feels unbearable. But their grief proved obedience carries eternal weight. I was shivering, clinging to my fraying identity. When the fifth heaven dissolved, I was pulled higher into the sixth, and my chest tightened with deep dread. Nothing could have prepared me. In this overwhelming realm, ancient beings held terrifying secrets. They knew my name. They knew my shadows. They knew every single hidden failure that I had prayed God had simply forgotten about. Imagine realizing spiritual beings know your entire life story. Every selfish choice I ever made, every lonely tear I cried, every moment of faith and every miserable failure. All documented with terrifying precision. A wave of panic washed over me. I felt entirely exposed, stripped of the frail masks I wore to protect my fragile identity. I braced for condemnation, waiting for swift judgment. But as I walked deeper into the sixth heaven, that is not what met me. There was no dark despair here. Instead, a wave of holy reverence dropped me to my trembling knees. It felt intensely personal, breaking down the lonely walls I had built around my heart. These were not the weather angels of the first heaven. These entities operated on a scale that utterly shattered everything I thought I understood about myself. These were not the chained rebels rotting in darkness, nor the grieving guardians I had just left behind. The beings I faced now were celestial scholars. They were silent scribes governing the stars and shifting seasons. But as I watched them, a deep terror seized my chest. I realized they were not just mapping the cosmos. They were tracking me, angels specifically assigned to watch our earthly lives. They record absolutely everything, not just the proud victories but the hidden agonies. That painful sacrifice I thought nobody noticed. That desperate, lonely prayer I choked out at 3 a.m. when the isolation felt like it would swallow me whole. They wrote down every single tear. The comfortable illusion of my solitary existence was instantly shattered. This is not some ancient myth. It is undeniably, terrifyingly real. trembling among the silent scribes. The weight of the ancient prophecies crushed down on me. The books are real, the terrifying records used when the dead are judged. The great scrolls of remembrance are housed right here in the sixth heaven, and I realized with absolute horror that my name was written inside them. It sent a cold spike of fear through my veins. But you and I need to let this wake us up. I used to comfort myself with the dark temptation that my daily actions did not truly matter, that divine grace would simply erase my cowardly passivity. But standing in this vast, holy archive destroyed that comfortable lie entirely. Salvation cannot be earned by our own hands. But grace does not excuse us from the earthly battle. Our choices do not just vanish into the empty dirt. They are permanently, eternally recorded. Salvation is a free gift. I clung to that truth like a lifeline in the blinding light of this realm. But the sixth heaven demands that a redeemed life must produce something real. I felt a suffocating pressure bearing down on my chest, the absolute weight of my true identity. There are specific assignments carved into my story before I ever drew breath. These watchful angels were staring straight at me, waiting to see if I would embrace my purpose or surrender to my own lonely fears. Then, right as I felt I might collapse under the terror of my own failures, I saw something that made me drop to my knees and weep. Among the silent recorders were majestic, interceding angels. Their sacred assignment was to gather up our frail, desperate human prayers, carrying them directly through the heavens to present them before the Creator. Every time I cried out in the dark, believing I was completely alone, I was wrong. Our prayers never vanish into the cold void. I watched as they ascended through the realms I had just survived, handled by ancient, devoted beings. Not a single desperate cry from my lonely heart was ever lost. This celestial machinery was God's way of declaring, "I have always seen you." Realizing how fully known I was, how many times my frail name was spoken in heaven's courts, nearly shattered my mind. I felt my earthly identity slipping away into the holy light. If that truth feels too heavy for you and I to hold, I beg you to brace yourself. The terrifying majesty waiting in the seventh heaven is completely beyond anything a human mind was ever designed to comprehend. Have you ever wondered what it costs a mortal soul to stand where angels cover their faces in absolute terror? I am standing on the threshold of the seventh heaven, and my earthly identity feels like it is burning away to ash. You and I have walked a long, terrifying road together to get here. I felt the freezing cosmic waters of the first heaven soak my bones. I trembled in the oppressive darkness of the second heaven, listening to the weeping of chained, fallen angels. I wandered through the third heaven, torn between the scent of sweet paradise and the choking smoke of torment. In the fourth, the unending celestial songs nearly shattered my mind, followed by the crushing, lonely silence of the fifth. By the time I reached the sixth heaven, listening to ancient angels record my own name, I felt completely stripped of who I once was. 6 heavens. 6 incomprehensible layers of spiritual reality that press heavily against my fragile mind. But none of it prepared me for what lies ahead. Everything I have endured was funneling me toward one final, unbearable destination. I feel incredibly small, so entirely alone. Even Enoch, a man who walked flawlessly with the Creator for 300 years, froze at this exact boundary. He could not force his mortal legs to take another step without divine help. This realm permanently shatters your grip on who you are. Stay with me, we must cross this threshold together. When I stepped over that line, the very atmosphere fractured into something unrecognizable. The earlier realms were terrifying, yes, but I could still reason. Here, my earthly logic dissolves into nothingness. I am drowning in a light so violent, so intensely alive that it does not just hit my eyes, it passes straight through my flesh, my bones, my very soul. It exposes every hidden flaw, every selfish thought I have ever harbored, laying my fragile identity completely bare. It is a light of absolute, terrifying truth. In this blinding glare, I see the guardians of the seventh heaven. They are nothing like the angels in the lower realms. These are the archangels, the cherubim. The seraphim, creatures of such devastating glory that I want to hide my face in the dust. I watch them, entirely consumed by an unending fever of worship. Just as Isaiah recorded in chapter 6. They hide their faces and feet beneath massive wings, crying out with a force that violently shakes my trembling body. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. That beautifully terrifying cry has echoed here since before I was formed, and will outlast humanity. But you and I must pause here, because this is the moment my heart almost stops beating. As my mortal eyes adjust to a radiance that makes the sun look like a dying ember, I see the throne. Sitting there is no abstract concept, it is the living God. The Ancient of Days. The sheer pressure of His presence threatens to crush my mind completely. As Daniel chapter 7 verse 9 describes, His clothing is blindingly white, His hair like pure wool. The throne itself is a chaotic storm of blazing fire, turning on wheels of endless flame. I am just a speck of dust standing before the architect of eternity, entirely stripped of my earthly name. A river of liquid fire pours from the throne, radiating a heat that makes me gasp. 10,000 times 10,000 majestic beings stand in attendance, and yet I am standing here too. I am just a human being, a fragile collection of dust, breath, and fear, constantly tempted to flee back to the safety of my earthly life. I stand in the direct presence of the Almighty, and miraculously I am not burned alive, not because I am worthy. I have failed more times than I can count, but God in His terrifying grace holds me here. He reveals this to show us He is not some small, manageable idea you can pack into a quick morning prayer. He is the infinite ruler. From the freezing deep of the first heaven to the blinding fire of the seventh, creation screams one truth. He was Lord long before I drew my first breath. He will remain Lord long after my bones turn to dust. There is nowhere you can hide, not in the dirt, not in the clouds, not in any cosmic realm, where His gaze does not pierce right through you. I desperately need you and I to grasp this, because the sheer loneliness of carrying this truth on earth is suffocating. The world is relentless, trying to strip away our identity as believers. It tries to make me doubt my own sanity, whispering that faith is just a pathetic crutch. The culture screams at us. The isolation is deafening. I feel the constant, heavy temptation to just give in and conform to the void. But against all that chaos, this vision of the seven heavens stands like a massive, immovable fortress. I have felt its weight pressing against my very soul. And I promise you, the high throne of eternity is still fiercely occupied. The Ancient of Days has never once abandoned his seat. The seraphim have not stopped their earth-shattering songs. The angels of the sixth heaven are still recording every victory and failure of my fleeting life. The souls in the second heaven still wait for their unavoidable doom. None of this heavenly reality wavers just because I feel entirely lost or afraid down here. God does not panic. He does not alter His decrees because of the cultural madness threatening to erase my earthly identity. This is exactly why His word must be the heavy anchor that keeps us from drowning. Not human traditions, but the eternal word that survives all profound loneliness. As Jesus warned in Matthew chapter 24 verse 35, the sky and earth will completely dissolve, but His sovereign words will stand entirely untouched. I beg you, anchor your soul to that truth. When my own mind betrays me, when the crushing pressure of the world makes me want to surrender my identity entirely, this is the only bedrock that holds firm. I have walked through the spiritual fire, and the reality is terrifyingly clear. His judgment is absolute, his paradise is waiting, his throne breathes with endless fire. Every day, you and I walk on the razor edge of eternity. Just one fragile heartbeat away from facing the blinding light I stood in. Please, do not waste the breath you have been given. Do not treat his holy grace like a cheap safety net. Fight the heavy temptation to blend in and disappear. The watchers in the sixth heaven have their eyes on us. And the same terrifying, magnificent God who pulled Enoch from the earth is standing right beside you, demanding everything you are. I sit in the dust, listening, and the fear of losing my identity begins to fade. He knows my name. He has always known it, even when I felt completely abandoned in this wilderness. He is inviting us right now to walk beside him just like Enoch did, without shame. Before this ends, I need to tell you two things. If this message stirred an ancient hunger in your chest today, do not just walk away. Leave a comment below. Tell us which of the seven heavens moved your weary soul. Hit that like button so this light can reach someone else who is searching and feeling just as lost. Subscribe to this channel so every time we unroll these sacred words, we stand together. Every single like and comment is a trumpet blast, proving the God of the seven heavens still speaks. The second thing is the heaviest. I know the pressure of forgetting who I am in the dark. If you walked through these seven heavens today and felt that conviction, you know you must be right with the King on the throne. Do not wait. The third heaven has a fixed chasm, and none of us in this wasteland know how many heartbeats remain. Jesus Christ entered our broken dust. He lived the pure life we could not, died the brutal death our rebellion earned, and rose on the third day. That empty tomb proves the Creator made a way for us exiles to come home. It is not about our own goodness, but entirely His grace. If you want to step across that eternal divide today, while your lungs still draw breath, join me. Type it in the comments, declare it out loud. Write these exact words in the comments, and feel the truth of them anchor your wandering soul. Say, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior of my life. I am typing it too, my hands shaking as the heavy chains of my past finally fall away in the sand. If you just type that, if you let those words leave your lips, know that heaven itself stopped to listen. The fiery angels of the sixth heaven have etched your name into their eternal records. And the God on the blazing throne of the seventh heaven, the Ancient of Days, the very same God who pulled Enoch up from the earth and who has spent your entire life searching for you in the wilderness, He has received your declaration. You do not have to be afraid or lonely anymore. The exile is over. Welcome home.